Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Referrals meeting of Mid Suffolk District Council. May I first of all remind you of some domestic arrangements. Toilets are situated outside the meeting room opposite the stairs. The cold water is also available in the breakout area outside the meeting room. If the fire alarm should sound, please leave the meeting room by following the fire exit signs and meet at the Ipswich Town Football Club training pitch. Do not re-enter the building until you are told it is safe to do so. Please switch off all mobile phones or turn them to silent. I would like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing. The whole of the meeting will be filmed, except where there are confidential or exempt items. If you make a representation to the meeting, you will be deemed by the Council to have consented to being filmed and to the possible use of those images and sound recordings for webcasting and or training purposes. The Council, members of the public and press may record, film, photograph or broadcast this meeting when the public and press are not lawfully excluded. Finally, can members and officers please ensure that you press the microphone for speaking and turn off when you've finished. Thank you. So I'll do a few introductions. My name's Cathy Guthrie and I'm the chairman today. And coming along the table we have Ian Dupre, our legal officer, we have Gemma Walker, a senior planning manager, and then we have Robert Carmichael, the committee officer, and Daniel Cameron, who's our planning officer today. And we also have our... Pardon? Maggie Smith, our internet connection person. We have... I'm not sure what to call her, but it was very rude of me to forget your name anyway. I'm sorry about that. And then we have planning officers and members of the Mid Suffolk District Council over there, who some will present the case or record bits and pieces of it. We have members of the committee who will go into debate and come up with a resolution to the applications. And ladies and gentlemen, in the audience over there can be the parish council, objectors, supporters, applicants, and the ward member, who I think is sitting over here, will go over there. And for those of you who haven't been here before, we do have the point where when each person has presented the case, if there's a relevant question and a question only, not debate, they can ask either the officer or whoever's presenting the information a question. So without further ado, can we move on, please? But before we do, I think we need to go on to the agenda. I think it would be fair, we'll get down to their declarations. Right, so apologies for absence and substitutions.
Thank you, Chair. We have apologies from Councillor Humphreys, Councillor Richardson, Councillor Carter and Councillor Turner.
Thank you. And to receive any declarations of pecuniary or non-pecuniary interest by members, and I think we can all put our hands up that we know both of the applicants, so I think that would be fair to say. Is that all of... Councillor, a few councillors won't know all of them. You don't know either of the two, so there's...
Okay, let's take it in terms for the first application first. So, yeah, Councillor...
The first application then will be for Councillor Marchant that we know. So
that's everyone apart from Councillor Gould.
Right. And then for the second application for Councillor Vinya Haddingham.
I think that's it.
And Madam Chairman, if I may, following on from that, I've had discussions with a couple of members about their specific situation. My understanding is Councillor Norris has said to me that he, as somebody who was ex-councillor Mrs. Marchant, if I can call her that, fellow ward member as well as a member of the same political group, he feels that their former cooperation as colleagues in one ward and nature of friendliness is such that he ought not to participate in this item. I think in any event he would be going over there as the ward member if he was staying. But although the letter of the law doesn't oblige him to, he's decided, I think, sensibly to go out the room for the first item. Councillor Field has also taken my advice simply on the cautious and sensible basis that he was a member of the same political group. And in his own judgment, he's quite able to make a a proper decision on this matter, and that sounds absolutely sensible to me. So he has declared the same interest as all of you, but he will stay and participate, and he's not the ward member. So I think that deals with all those issues.
Thank you. And we come on to declarations of lobbying. So those of us who've received emails, I know, yes, item 1, yeah, and also for item 2, because Councillor Marchant has sent an email round today. Did I have them as late papers then, when I had these papers that were sent to me then, from the second applicant? Late papers then, okay then, right. I read them last night, that's all. So they were late papers, so not to count, that's my error on that one. Okay, so it's just the second one. Declarations of personal site visits. No. Confirmation of the minutes of the meeting of the 27th of February. And if I can just take them from page 1 through to page 9, and unless there's any amendments, can I take them as read, please? Agreed. And the same for the minutes that were on the 13th of March, from the first page through to page 8. Can I also take them as read unless there's any alterations? Agreed. Thank you very much. I'll mark them during the meeting. To receive any notification of petitions in accordance with the Council's petition scheme.
None received, Chair.
Thank you. And the schedule of applications will be as presented. So if we can allow our colleague to depart the room, and we'll move on to the first application. But before we do, we have a little bit of extra information. So Gemma's going to tell us a bit more.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I just wanted to pick this up quickly with members, both items having some of the same issues. Both were presented to committee previously, and because they are member overturn of the officer recommendation, and both are, well, now were in Councillor Marchant's case, councillors, the requirement through the planning charter is for them to come to referrals. So that's why we're here to look at those, because of that. So they've both got the recommendation from their original committee that committee was minded to approve against the officer recommendation. So I just wanted to pick up today, in terms of the decision-making process for today, we have got that minded to from those committees, that they made those decisions, but in terms of decision-making today, we do need to bear in mind the special regard that we need to have to protecting, preserving buildings, their setting, features of special architectural or historic interest, which is section 66 of the Planning, Listed Building and Conservation Areas Act, that we have to have special regard to. And in terms of the actual decision making, the MPPF, the paragraphs 193, 194, 195, 196, that what you'll probably find we refer to. If at any point you'd like us to clarify, we can do that, but just very quickly, we've got to give great weight to an asset's conservation, and the more important the asset, the greater the weight should be. And then when we're looking at harm, we're looking at no harm, less than substantial harm, and as you go up through that scale, the weight to be given and the argument for that harm should be greater as we go up. I think in both cases we're talking less than substantial harm is what our heritage team have suggested to you. If you agree with that, we need to be considering public benefits that might outweigh that, or if you think there is a different level of harm, that's what we need to understand from you to move forward with that decision. Hopefully that helps. What we need to do is follow those requirements of the Planning and Listed Building Act and the MPPF, so we can make that decision that's not then at risk for members. From judicial review, sorry to clarify.
Thank you for that. So, Daniel, if you'd like to start the presentation, please. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, so the presentation is as was shown on the 24th of April when this was last seen. So if we move forward, that's the application site identified. Large sort of two L-shaped buildings behind are the former council offices in Needham Market, so the site should hopefully be familiar to members. This is an overlay placed on the previous plan showing listed buildings within the area, green denoting grade 1 listing, orange denoting grade 2 and red denoting grade 2 star. It also shows TPOs. Within the immediate vicinity we've got a number of grade 2 listed buildings, although obviously as you move further down the high street you do have a grade 1, and off the high street Smallway we do have a grade 2 star listed building. Again, similar to the previous map, this just overlays the conservation area for Needham Market, just to demonstrate to members that the application site is firmly within the conservation area as well. We have the aerial map, which actually in this context is less useful than the on-site photos, but if we run through the submitted plans first, I'll just explain the works to the members. Again, site layout plan, much the same as we've already seen. This is the existing elevational plan of the building. It's a simple rendered two-cell building. You can see the barge boards, decorative barge boards on the side there, on the ground floor, and then raised window. And this is the proposed elevation with the pargeting inserted into the render. It's a combination of sort of scroll ivy, leaf work with Tudor roses at 3 Tudor roses within at various points. This is a photo of the site in question. We've got the coloured render applied to the building, and then where the protruding beam at first floor seems to come out, that's where, to my mind, from the plans that we've been shown, that's where the pargeting would be inserted. And then this is the same elevation but seen from further away down the high street. In representations made on the item, the agent brought up a number of other instances of pargeting and scroll work within Needham Market itself. If we run through from the Tudor rows in the top left through to top right, bottom right, and then bottom left, they are variously at 11 High Street, 69 High Street, Hill House Lane, and number 7 High Street. In researching these, with regards to number 11 and the Tudor rows, I can see no record of an application being made for the application of the Tudor rows in render. With regards to 69 High Street, the stucco render is listed within its list description and was likely applied at the time it was constructed. It may have been repaired since, but it's largely where it was. In terms of Hill House Lane, these appear to be on modern buildings set within a modern housing development, so would have been put in. So there would be no, they aren't listed buildings, so there'd be no requirement for listed building consent or planning application to insert those. And then the last one there, number 7, it is listed within the this description given by Historic England as likely being applied sometime in the 1980s. It doesn't get any more precise than that, just circa 1980, but there's no evidence of an application, so it may have been applied prior to listing. In terms of the report before members, if we go back to the elevation, as presented, we had the less than substantial harm identified by the Council's Heritage team. We then went through the process in terms of the justification for that harm and could find no public benefits to outweigh the less than substantial harm identified, hence the recommendation of refusal given at the previous committee. In terms of the previous committee, we have obviously the details listed for members, and officers have also provided a list of likely conditions that members would want to consider should they want to approve the application contrary to officer recommendation. At the previous meeting, there was a discussion about whether or not the colour of the render on the building would change. From details sent in by the agent, I understand that the colour of the render on the building is to remain as is. It would just be the insertion of the pargeting. We've also been provided with details of how that would be done. The pargeting panel would be constructed on site, then brought to site. An element of render would be removed, and then the pargeting would be applied and rendered into that finish. And further details are provided by the agent on page 31 of the report. I'll move things over to committee and we can begin debate.
Thank you very much. Just a slip of the tongue there, you said would be made on site. It's going to be made off site,
yes,
and then brought to site. So does anybody have any questions for the planning officer? Councillor Hicks, then Councillor Mansell. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Could you just clarify for me the view of heritage and pargeting? So is it that pargeting was not a feature of this house originally, therefore that's why it shouldn't go on? Or is the reason for less than substantial harm because it's viewed out of keeping within the vicinity of Needham Market? What is the reasons for it? Is it because it's not something appropriate to a house of that age, or is it just in the locality?
Yeah, thank you. The consultation from the heritage team is given on page 25. And yes, I think in their view, although there is evidence of pargeting within Needham Market itself, the pargeting all tends to be on buildings dating from a later period than the application building. So while it is rendered, it would not have had the fine pargeting work that is proposed. The building itself is quite a simple vernacular building, and I think to some degree the heritage team would like it to remain sort of quite a simple, unadorned building. There is some detail on the frontage of the building with the initial C going over the initials RM. I haven't got a photo of that for you, unfortunately, but it is listed within the list description given on page 27. That also contains the date 1716, which I think, given the likely age of the building from the list, is not original, but was probably added at a later point.
I think also to add to that, we've got the heritage team report on page 43, which amplifies it as well. Then Councillor Mansell, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm looking at the elevation diagrams on pages 39 and 40, and they show that the eaves they've got a scalloped edge, but the photograph that you showed me looked like it was a straight edge. So is that gonna happen anyway? That they're gonna do the scalloped edge of the barge boards on the eaves, or is the diagram not going to happen as per the photograph?
So in terms of the listed building consent, the works that they can carry out are the works that they describe within the application, which only extends to the pargeting. The drawings are provided for clarity. They are conditioned so that we can ensure that the detail is provided, but no, the scalloped edges to the barge boards, if the applicant wanted to apply those, would need to be subject to another listed building consent for those. They couldn't introduce those scalloped barge boards within this application.
We do actually have the architect here, so we can ask that question to the architect when they come forwards, but thank you for that information. Did anyone else want to ask the officer a question? Councillor Field?
Just the issue of the existing render. I understand, I think, from the report that it's been replaced relatively recently. Is that correct? So it's not been there for the age of the house, for instance?
Potentially, yes. There have been a number of works relating to this one. I think looking down the list of planning history associated with this application, there's the insertion of new windows in 1984. So presumably has been there has been there for some time, and we also have the 1981 application for a new window and timber shutters to the front elevation as well, as well as various other listed building works that we've got dating back through the 90s and noughties. There, it doesn't form part of this application. It is just shown to reflect the actual elevation that we're discussing.
Thank you. Any further questions for the officer? Thank you very much indeed. Then we'll move on. We don't have a parish council objector or supporter. We have the applicant's agent, which is Martin O'Shea. If you'd like to come forward, please, and take a seat just up there, and you have 3 minutes.
Madam Chairman, if I may, just briefly, I'll save Mr O'Shea using any of his precious 3 minutes just to say that I was made aware by Mrs Marchant this week that Mr O'Shea's very recently become a member of Needham Market Town Council, but I've advised that that's not a problem because he's here in a professional capacity to represent the applicant. He wasn't involved in the parish council deciding, the town council deciding what their response would be. So his membership of it now is purely coincidental and not relevant.
Thank you. So Mr O'Shea, if you'd like to make your presentation, that will be fine. Thank you.
Well, the client came to me with a request that pargeting be designed and incorporated in the elevation of her house. It's in a prominent position within Needham Market. It's one of the first houses, the gables of the houses that you see when you come into the town from the Ipswich end. The pargeting itself is not necessarily a thing which is done just once at the original construction of a building. Pargeting is a thing which has lived over a good few hundred years, and people are still applying it to buildings for various reasons, maybe for information, for decoration, to try and recover a bit of history which has been lost over time. And I believe that the pargeting that Mrs Marchant wants to put on the front of her house, on the side of her house, would enhance the high street of Needham Market and would make Needham Market even more genuine in many ways than it is at the moment, because lots of things have been lost over the years. Shop fronts have been put in, people have done things without permission, buildings have lost their historic interest and their historic originality, and I believe that the pargeting, as proposed, would in fact return some of Needham to a more interesting and attractive town.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions? I'm sure you would like to ask your question. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, could I ask you about the diagrams on the papers that we've got that show a scalloped edge to the barge boards on the eaves, whereas the photograph showed a plain edge?
The barge board is scribed as shown on the drawing. Those photographs are old photographs. It's currently scribed barge board right the way up to the gable. And that drawing is an accurate representation of what the barge board is actually like. So I don't know how old the pictures were that you looked at. But yes, I have a photograph here of what it's currently like, which I took. And you'll see that it's...
just a minute. No, that's all right. Can we just ask, did that have planning permission then? So... could we have the time that was changed? Because Mr Cameron is telling me that the photographs were taken recently. I don't know how recently is recent.
Fairly recently.
Within the last year?
Probably. I'm willing to accept that the scalloped edge might be there now, but it's whether or not we've got this LBC for it.
Yes. Okay, well, we'll move on from that at the moment, but you've asked the question. We haven't quite got the answer to that. We'll ponder in our debate, I think, possibly. Does anyone else have another question at all? No? Right. If you'd like to return to your seat then. Thank you very much indeed. Mr O'Shea, do you want to just give the photograph to the planning officer and he will just offer it up to our colleagues? It's not normal that we do that, but I think under the circumstances, because of the confusion, we should just have the opportunity to look at it. So moving on, Councillor Phillips isn't here, and of course Councillor Norris was quite rightly decided to leave the room. So we're actually now open to debate. If somebody'd like to kick off, that would be fine. At the moment, we haven't. Yeah. We haven't sort of got details of when that was done or whether it needed planning permission. Would it have needed planning permission? So it would have needed listed building consent. Excuse me, Mrs Marchant, could you just come forward again for us? I'm sorry to get you bobbing up and down there. I've been advised by the planning officer that in fact listed building consent would have been required. Do you know if you have applied for listed building consent to have those barge boards in the vernacular they are?
Listed building consent wasn't applied for. It was done at the time of the rendering.
Which was? Could you tell us roughly when?
Last year.
Right, that's answered our question. Thank you very much indeed. So I'm being advised by the legal that it's a different issue and not relevant to this. We can sort that out under another section of Mid-Suffolk. So, Councillor Matheson, thank you.
Yeah, just to say, having the photograph we've just seen, I can confirm that is very recent because of the scaffolding on the Institute building, which you can see in the photograph.
I'm sure it is. I don't think anybody doubts that. Yeah. So does anybody want to sort of enter the debate as to what we should be looking at here? Yes, indeed. Councillor Mayor.
I look at the pargeting and I see a fairly plain building in that it has its own beauty. The pargeting and now the additional woodwork seem out of place. So, yeah, we're trying to turn the building into something that it wasn't originally.
Thank you for that. Anyone else like to pass a comment? Yes, Councillor Warboys.
I think I'd just like to follow on from that. It's not just the actual building itself, but the context of the building. It's in the context of several Grade 2 listed houses, which are all quite simple and straightforward. And the introduction of an element of decoration like that would be actually quite alien, I think, and I support what the Heritage Officers says about it.
Thank you for that. That's helpful. Thank you very much. Councillor Mansell.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, I think that the addition of pargeting on the end of that dwelling is probably, open to personal, view. Some people will think it's very attractive. Others may not find it so attractive. I think it's, it's in the eye of the beholder. It's a piece of artwork. But I mean, I can't disagree with the Heritage Officer's comment, is that it does completely change the face of that gable end, and it is very prominent as you're approaching Needham Market along the high street. And what does it say? You know, we are told that if there is any harm, less than substantial harm, to a listed building, it needs to be outweighed by public benefit. And I can't, I mean, it may be of benefit to the occupier of the house, they may like the look of it, but I can't see that it's got any public benefit. So at the moment I'm inclined to go along with the officer, because there clearly is some harm, because you're making a very prominent change to a side of a building that everybody will see as they walk down the high street, and it is not as it was, and therefore it is harm. I mean, I'm not one to wrap old buildings in cotton wool and say we never change them. Normally I'm not that fussed about history, but sorry, what is the public benefit in this application? At the moment I can see none, so at the moment I am going towards going along with the officer recommendation.
Thank you for that. Well, being a member on the previous committee, we were, as you know, minded to approve, but I did personally ask for further information as to how this was going to be applied, and we've now been given that information in this document on page 31, and it strikes me as though this is going to be almost like a picture put on the side of the house. And I do tend to agree with what you've just said there, and hindsight is a wonderful thing. So I am sort of more in keeping with the Heritage Officer's views at the moment, because it's subjective as to whether it is public benefit. But I will carry on and listen, but I thought I'd put that in because I was on the previous committee. So Councillor Muller, please. Thank you.
Yeah, I must admit, I do agree with the comments of my colleagues. I personally cannot see any public benefit to this at all, and I think it should remain as it is, basically, in my personal opinion.
Councillor Matheson.
Yeah, my approach to listed buildings and heritage offices over a lot of years now has always been that that to respect their professional views, because I know very well that I'm not an expert in listed buildings, and so I will look for the need to do something to the building to maintain it in a continued use, to stop it crumbling away, or to give it a 21st century purpose. But this doesn't seem to fit into that at all. So I take my usual view, really, that the professions know what they're talking about.
Thank you for that, Councillor Matheson. Councillor Hicks, thank you.
Thank you very much. It's interesting, isn't it? Because really, public benefit, I think, on this is subjective. I mean, it's very hard to say. Some people are going to think it's absolutely improving the building. Others are going to think that actually, and they want to see a bit of decoration there. Others will think, like the heritage team, that actually it's a historic building that never would have had that in the beginning, and therefore adding it at this late stage is actually causing some harm, although less than substantial harm. So, and I absolutely agree with Councillor Matheson's comments that this doesn't change the use of the building. The building will still continue to be a home with or without this. So I'm afraid I'm going to also come down on the side of the officer's recommendation, and I'm afraid I'm happy to propose refusal as laid out in the papers.
Thank you for that, Councillor Hicks. Anyone else wishing to speak? Yes, Councillor Eburn, thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm in agreement with my colleagues, and I think that, as one of my colleagues has said, not to wrap historic buildings up in cotton wool. In a way, if it was a far more modern addition, it might actually, have had some kind of purpose, to and public benefit, but trying to put something back onto it that may or may not have been there doesn't seem to fit with the opinion of the heritage officers, and I'm also minded to agree with the officers, and I'm happy to second my colleagues' proposal.
Thank you for that, Councillor. Does anyone else wish to speak? Councillor Field?
Thank you. I think I tend to go with the view that we shouldn't employ heritage officers and then ignore their advice. You know, it is a professional advice. I do look at the list of changes that have been made to this building. They're all pretty minor. They're obviously all to improve its qualities as a dwelling place, and we do want to keep it in use quite clearly, and obviously committees of various types have taken that view over the years. So I'm a little concerned that in rejecting this, we're rejecting what is a pretty minor change, and one that I think, as Councillor Hicks mentions, may or may not be considered as appropriate by other visitors to the Town of Needham Market and viewing the building from the public realm. So I certainly have some difficulty with this decision, but I think overall my view is we should stick to the recommendations of our heritage officers.
Right. Thank you for that. Does anyone else wish to speak, or because I have a proposer and a seconder, can we go to the vote? So in that case, I have a proposer and a seconder as per the recommendation on page 29 to refuse it. And so all those in favour of the refusal, please vote.
10.
And those against? And an abstention. Thank you. So thank you for your full debate on that. Thank you very much indeed. So we move on to the next case.
We need Councillor Norris back.
Oh yes. Can we get Councillor Norris back?
Yes, I'll go and get Councillor Paddy.
We're just waiting for the councillor to return, so thank you very much. Right, thank you very much. If we can start again, please, page 47. And John is going to present the case to us today. Thank you.
Thank you. So this is both householder planning application and listed building consent for an extension to the lobby at Walsham Hall. So the application site is East Amendham. It's in a very rural location, and it's part of a wider farmstead. It is a Grade 2 listed building, and just opposite the site we have a public footpath, but effectively there are a few constraints. It is identified as potentially contaminated land, given the farm uses within that location, but that's not a specific designation within the local plan or any of your policies. It's just a constraint to highlight there might be some issues there that we'd have to look into. Essentially that wouldn't apply to this application though in terms of an extension to the property itself. And again, this is also within a influence area for the SSSI. so we are aware of that constraint, but ultimately, in terms of the nature of this application being an extension, we don't have any concerns in that respect either. So the application, in terms of an aerial view, it is a fairly well enclosed, mature garden. It surrounds the site, and it's not really readily seen outside of the site. And if I carry on forward, just to explain where we are, it's a very rural location. And Mendham is to the left on your screen, so you can see the distance from the nearest more significant population. So back to the block plan, and I'm trying to get used to this looking at a screen. So ultimately we have the public highway running along the corner here, public footpath was opposite, but the site itself is for this extension, which is at the rear in terms of looking at the highway to the property, and is enclosed by the L shape of the existing building. So existing elevation, so this is what is there at the moment. Now the photos are quite helpful in trying to look at what we're looking at a rendered listed building. We have on the one side a modern extension just there, but the proposal site is in respect of this fairly unaltered elevation currently. This is obviously was at a committee, and members were minded to approve, subject to looking at some alterations to the proposal. So this is the proposal that members saw at that last committee, and this is the application then. Since that committee, officers looked to renegotiate the scheme, and some of those details are in your late papers as well, but essentially it is now changed to this design. We have the glazing within the apex removed, we have the posts either side of the doorway also taken away from the scheme to simplify the proposal. And we have some clarification over the access to it. There was concerns about suitable access, and we have a handrail that's been added to this detail. In plan form, the proposal is essentially unchanged from last committee. We are looking at a lobby area and internal WC. And then looking at the photographs, so we have the modern extension, the more recent extension on the left-hand side, and we have the area where the proposed lobby and extension is proposed to be here. So just circling around and looking straight onto the area in question, just get an idea of the area. And of course this is part of a larger farmstead site as well, so it's fairly active in that regard. Hopefully those photos give you a general idea of the site and its context. Thank you. So in terms of this proposal, I think it's fair to say that there are no real planning issues other than the essential one, which is regarding the listed building and the degree of harm or no harm that we were looking at in respect of this application. It has been taken from our heritage officers and your officers' recommendation that this does cause harm. And on that basis, it's called less than substantial harm in this instance, because we feel this is detrimental to the character of the building, is an fairly undeveloped part of the building. And so for the recommendation was one of refusal, as stated in your papers. However, members have been minded to seek approval, subject to some changes to the design, and that's come forward to you today. Those changes have taken place and essentially do reduce the, where I could phrase this, sort of higher status appearance of the building has perhaps been toned down a little bit, but still doesn't negate what we deem to be harm in the context of less than substantial harm, and so therefore we are maintaining the officer refusal in that respect. Members obviously need to assess whether they still maintain it does or doesn't cause harm, and if they do consider it does cause less than substantial harm, they may wish to then look at what possible public benefits would result. And that's my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Just to obviously flag up to members that they're aware as well, is page 62 is the original design, and so that's why in late papers we've got the new design. Certainly a lot of it has been altered, and as both planning officers have mentioned, we've got to look at public benefit, which we can go into in more detail in the debate. But I just wanted to point out that these new late papers are the design that the officer just had up on the screen. So we need to have that in mind. So does anybody have any questions for the planning officer? Councillor Mansell?
I was trying to look at the plan. I think the best one to look at is the one we've got on page 60, which has got the unnamed road, which I believe is a public right-of-way. On the OS map, it's green spots, which I think is a road used as a public path or something. Will the view of the porch be visible from that public right-of-way?
I will say no. I will look at the case officer and just double check, but no. Essentially, the only views available of the extension will be private views of the occupier or any guests.
Councillor Mansell? Councillor Matheson?
Yeah, I was going to ask the officers if they could put slide 12 up again. I see that that's also in the late papers. I'm just actually slightly struggling to understand the steps. So what we're saying is that, because I thought it was level access when we looked at it before, or steps up, but there's steps down. I see. So there's steps down now with a handrail, and I see, and that line, yeah, I see that line above the steps is just indicating, I don't know, the height.
It's the original land line.
There always were the steps there in the original document, and as they are.
Yeah, I think I'm.
Any further questions? No? Then in that case, we don't have the Parish Council objector or supporter, but we have Mr Stephen Haddingham, if you'd like to come forward. We have got late papers that he presented to the planning officers some time ago, and we all have had a copy of those late papers. And so if you'd like to put your case or tell us a little more about it, please feel free to start. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, all of you. I was going to read, I wrote a letter up with an update on the position, but the letter's in the late papers, so I won't sort of bore you with that, but I'd be delighted to answer any questions that you may have.
I'd just like to clarify, we've sort of guessed it, but just clarify the levels and the steps, because Councillor Matheson did sort of question it.
So yeah. The levels aren't changing. The finished floor level in the house is remaining the same, and the level of the concrete apron outside the garage is remaining the same, but because of the extension, we're having to move the steps from where they are, because that's under the footprint of the extension, to obviously the steps that need to be replaced, so that the floor levels will remain the same, the difference in height will remain the same, but the steps will have to be recreated further back from the existing house. And we added the handrail because that was a concern of the committee. You know, it was a suggestion which we were happy to employ.
Yeah, that's very clear. Thank you.
Good, thanks. Does anyone else have any questions for Mr Haddingham? Yes, Councillor Eburn.
Thank you very much, Chair. I've got two questions, if I may. Firstly, the lean-to, which we've seen on slides 14 and 15. Could you tell me when that was added?
You mean the substantial porch area? Yes, the sort of the ugly lean-to. Yeah, that was early 80s by a member of my family, but 3 previous owners ago.
And secondly, I understand from the papers that that entrance, the rear entrance to the house, is used by visitors, and to there. Could you give me an idea of how many people visit and use that access other than family?
Well, the existing porch is just goes into mine and my wife's office at the rear of the house, and what was originally the kitchen, historically, and the area which we now use as a kitchen family dining area is the opposite end of the house, which is why we've now got this problem that we literally do have to walk through 5 rooms to get to the WC from the door, which is predominantly used. So 90% of foot traffic goes into our kitchen, dining family area, which is the difficulty we have.
If I may, Chair, just how many visitors do you have? Is what the
well, I mean, probably. I mean, business-wise, probably 4 a week.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think that's something we debated the last time, was that, you have lorry drivers coming along, people on site selling things, and if they need a lavatory, then they have to traipse through the house. I think, is that correct? I'm not trying to put words into your mouth, but that's what we did the last time, was it not?
Yes, that is correct. We don't have a toilet outside, although we obviously could do, but we could build a toilet in the farm buildings. But it's really the awkwardness of because that's our family area. When people come in for you offer them a cup of coffee, they sit down and have a chat in an informal environment. If they need to use the facilities, they've either got to go upstairs through our master bedroom to the ensuite bathroom, or literally walk through 5 rooms into the 6th room, which is just, then if they're a stranger, do you stand guard over the WC door and give the impression that you're concerned they might rob you, or do you ask them to go outside again and in through the other door and then escort them? It's obviously a slightly absurd setup the way we've got it, and it's particularly for my wife as a female, I feel. It's very awkward.
I think you've answered the question rather than debating it for too long. I think we've got the gist of it. Yeah, sorry. Does anyone else have any other questions? Councillor Field?
Yes, just looking at the proposed porch, I see you've reduced the glazing area quite substantially, but do you feel it's now in keeping with the rest of the property? I notice most of it appears to have quite small openings, and one would have thought heritage officers were a bit sensitive to the amount of glass you put into listed buildings.
Yeah, well, we very much like the original design, which you've got details of, and regrettably scaled it back as because we'd considered the feedback that we'd had, and I guess that is subjective, but in our opinion, we really like the initial design. We like this one slightly less, but are still very happy with it, and hope that you are.
Thank you. Any further questions? No? Thank you very much indeed. If you'd like to return to your seat. So we can start into the debate. Thank you very much. Who wants to start us off with this? Anyone? I don't normally start from the chair, so I won't. Councillor Mansell, thank you.
Well, I did wait to see if anybody else wanted to put their hand up, but and as you say, you don't like to start the debate from the chair.
No.
I must admit, I find this quite difficult because, as I said in the previous application, I'm not normally overprotective about historic buildings, and I'm not a historian. I know very little about history of buildings, but my limited knowledge tells me that a lot of old buildings of this sort of era have quite an ornate frontage, and the back is sort of deliberately plain. It was like, I want to show off to the best of my advantage what the front of my house looks like, and the back is sort of a bit cheaper and a bit plainer. And the back of this house, although it is plain, it's a perfectly attractive back of the house, and the front is clearly the dominant side of the property. But I just feel that this porch is a little bit too ornate for the back of the property. And although it can't, or so I'm told by the planning officer, I'm not convinced that you won't actually see the ridge height from the road or the public path or whatever it is. It's not going to be seen by random members of the public walking past. It's only going to be seen by people actually visiting the farm, of which there seem to be quite a few. So are they members of the public or not? I'm not sure. But people walking past on the footpath might or might not just glimpse the ridge height of the porch. And although it's reduced its glazing and got rid of the pillars, it's still much more fancy than the rest of the back of the property. But the rest of the back of the property has already been compromised with the lean-to extension in the 80s. So, you know, again, similarly to the last one, what is the public benefit in this? It's somebody's private dwelling and they want a bit of space for their toilet and their lobby area. Is it a public benefit just because they happen to have visitors to the house? I'm not convinced. So I really am struggling as to know which way to go on this. But I have opened up the debate. I think it's too ornate for the back of the property, but I'm not convinced it's going to actually cause any member of the public any bother because they're not going to be able to see it. So how important is it that it is slightly more ornate than the rest of the back of the property? If you ask the heritage people, they'll probably say we shouldn't do it because it's less than substantial harm. And again, I'm struggling to see the public benefit. But anyway, I've owned up. I've said what I think, and I really don't know where I'm going on this yet.
That's very helpful. I've got two hands up here, so I've got Councillor Mayor and then Councillor Field, if I may, please.
Referring to public benefit, I think this building was built as a farmhouse in the 16th century. Adding that extension means it can be a farmhouse in the 21st century. You know, would I want people walking through my house to get to an office, you know, when they're delivering whatever farms get delivered? So I think there is a public benefit. I would question the word ornate. I don't see anything in it that is ornate. We can argue about the glazing, and I think the reduction in the glazing makes it far less intrusive. And yeah, I don't see that reflected in the report. I think the word's dominant due to its size. Well, I don't see that. I don't think it is dominant. I think it is in the public good, and hence I'm in support.
Thank you for that. Councillor Field.
A similar argument to before. We employ heritage officers for good reason. They're experts in this field, and they feel that this is a dominant extension that should not be allowed on a building of this nature. I have to say, I personally feel it is substantial. It has a lot of glazing, which is out of keeping with a building of this age. And it is quite dominant. It certainly has a public benefit, but we have to weigh the public benefit against the damage to the building. We're told that this is less than substantial. I believe there are some graduations within less than substantial, but it certainly is a less than substantial harm. It's outweighed by the public benefit of having a toilet which is available to visitors. I don't personally feel that is sufficient benefit to outweigh the damage this is doing. If it was significantly more substantial, less intrusive, then maybe there would be an argument. At the moment, I'm opposed.
Thank you. Councillor Gould.
Thank you. I find myself in agreement with Councillor Mayor. It seems to me, reading this, that there's an objection not necessarily to the idea of the thing itself, but to its scale, if I have that right. So there's not a matter of necessarily a principle of having the thing, but simply its size and the impact it has as it is presented on the back of the house. But in terms of the benefit to be derived from having this and what is a working farmhouse, I'd be inclined to want to see this proposal go forward. I mean, there's a piece of design, I don't know the amount of the glazing, I have mixed views on that. I mean, probably isolated from the house, the original design I think is more appealing, but that might just define me as a Philistine. I don't know, but the idea of it, I would support the application on the basis I've said. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Muller?
Thank you, Chair. Personally, I do agree with my colleagues here on my left. I personally, if I lived in this property, I wouldn't want people traipsing through my family area. There are a few people that go there, so I think there is some public benefit. And I do believe that the revised drawing is more in keeping with the actual building itself. So I am inclined to support the application.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak? Councillor Matheson?
Yeah, I was on Planning B when we looked at this before, and I wasn't party to the minded to approve actually. It is slightly less, but again, I look to the officers' professional opinions. If they're saying there is harm, then you've got to look for the benefit, and the benefit, in public benefit, I think it is the actual term, and that is rather tenuous actually. So I think I'll stay where I am with agreeing with officers on most of these things.
Thank you. Sarah, you've already had a go, so I'll have a go now, shall I? Yeah, I think public benefit is one of the things that we do have to explore. And I don't think it's just about going to a lavatory. I also think it's about the living standards of the property. And my mother-in-law does have a listed building, and it's an absolute nightmare to try and get double glazing or anything that's an improvement to the property. And when you open this door at the back, the wind must howl in and howl out. So I look not only for the current usage of it, but for the future usage of generations and generations to come. And it's very difficult to try and improve a listed building's green capacity, which I'm sure some of you are all very keen on, as am I. And so I see a double public benefit here, is not now for the family that are using it, but for those people that will be using it in the future, plus of course the visitors, as has been explained. So I'm sort of more in supportive of it. I do think it looks a lot better looking at the two. I've got the two propped up here from a quieter point of view, as I say. And I do appreciate the one single door is a very traditional Suffolk type view. But really, if you look at it in its location, which is why I wanted an overhead view, you've really got to have a neck like a giraffe to look round the corner to see anything from all the other angles except the private angles. So, I'm more supportive of it than perhaps some of you are. So, Councillor Mansell, you want to come back again, if you would then, please?
Yeah, if that's all right, Chair. I just that I was listening to what other people were saying, and I think I'm inclined to agree with Councillor Field about the size of the windows, because the back of that property does have quite small window openings, and despite the fact that this one has reduced its amount of glazing, it still is not particularly in character with the small windows at the back of the property. And as Councillor Field also pointed out, we have heritage officers who are far more knowledgeable than I certainly am about historic buildings and their legacy. So I must admit, having listened to other people's comments, and I take on board what you've said yourself, Chair, about the fact that wind's going to whistle through and it's going to be very cold in that kitchen. And yes, 21st century living probably does require you to have a toilet that's accessible, but perhaps there are other ways of doing it which are not as big or as glazed as what we are presented with here. That have other means of finding a toilet near the back door been looked at or not? So I think I am happy to propose that we go along with the officer recommendation, and I will move that as a motion.
Thank you for that. Councillor Eburn.
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't on the previous committee, so I'm not wasn't party to those discussions, and I don't have a problem with an extension per se. I am slightly concerned about the size and the design of it, because I think it does kind of put a sort of front door approach on the back of a building. But I'm still, sitting on the fence, as it were, in terms of which way to go. I think, as I say, I have no problem with the actual extension per se, and it's just potentially, the design and whether it should have more of a back of the house feel than a front of the house feel.
Thank you. Well, we are sort of nearing everybody's had a say. Councillor Field?
Just to say, I would prepare to second Councillor Mansell's proposal.
Thank you very much for that. So does anyone else wish to speak who hasn't spoken? No? Yes, Councillor Warboys.
Thank you. I think I'm tempted to, I side with the Heritage Officer's comments. I think the rear of the house at present, in particular that section, has got a dramatic simplicity about it. There's a rhythm of positive and negative shapes. I think the proposed extension would, I'm going to make a word up, I think, disharmonise that. It put all those things out of kilter. There is, it's not detailed very much on the floor plan, but there is a modern extension, a lean-to extension, which is used as an office. So there is a second access to the rear of the building, I believe. There's no, on the pictures it looks as though there's always another doorway.
Is it
14, slide 14.
Not clear on the drawing.
No.
Slide 14 is helpful.
That one.
Is that a door? That's the door. Is that a door?
The door that they're thinking of building this item around.
Is there a door there behind the car?
One or the other.
Is there a door on the lean-to?
That's the door
if I
into
can
the
say,
kitchen and living room, and on the lean-to,
the
to the left, behind the red car.
So what I'm highlighting at the moment is where the proposal would be in respect
Yes.
of the chimney to the door there. This is the more recent extension historically. I believe they are doors just there to access that extension. And if I then just jump up to the floor plan, so the door to the new lobby was on the right hand side when we looked at that photograph. This is an undefined area, but that's the modern extension that sits there. Now, I don't know, there's nothing detailed in terms of this plan of what goes on in that area itself. It's not, but it doesn't need to be surveyed for the purpose of this application, because the application is in regard to this element over here.
Yeah, so I think perhaps just continuing my comments, I think there are alternatives to the development of a porch.
Well, we can't suggest alternatives. We
No.
have to look at what's before us.
Yes.
Councillor, have you finished with your comments?
Yes,
That's helpful. Thank you very much. Councillor Norris.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Having listened to the debate, I'm actually coming around to opposing the officer's recommendation. I think the removal of the glazing and the posts in the additional papers that have been submitted does reduce the dominance of that extension. I take the point regarding the windows for comparison at the rear that already exist are much smaller than the glazing in the actual porch area itself. But at the end of the day, I think these are minor points. If, as opposed to buildings need to be usable, they need to be habitable, to endure. And I think a lot of buildings, if you look at a lot of listed buildings across the east of England, and if you look at the structure of them, it is apparent that the fabric of the building has been changed many times over the years. I have no problem with what is proposed, and I will be opposing the recommendation for refusal. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, well, on that we have a proposer and a seconder to accept the officer's recommendations, which are on page, where are we? I've lost it, I've turned my pages over. 52, is it? Which is to refuse the application. So all those in favour of refusal, if you would like to vote now, please.
1, 2, 3. 4 for refusal.
Is it 4 for refusal? Yeah.
4 yes. Yeah.
And those against?
1, 2, 3, 5. Is that 5?
5.
Oh, sorry, 6.
6. Is it 6?
Yes.
Oh, yes, I can see. Sorry. Councillor Muller and Councillor... So that's 6. So I think the officers would need some reasoning. And I've written myself down here is the visitors, the public improvement is visitors' availability to use... Sorry, have we got to put a proposal and a... Oh well, sorry. So we've lost the motion. Sorry, yeah.
We've lost the refusal, Madam Chair.
So I now need a proposer and
another proposal, unless Mr. Payton-G has something to insert. So I think, so yeah, Madam Chairman, obviously whoever, if a member is going to propose approval, it's up to them if they are or not. The proposer and seconder will need to have in their mind those two things that Mr. Payton-G's just said.
Yeah, I'd like to propose, and let's get this right, I'm proposing that we reject the officer's recommendation. And that we do approve.
Is there harm? Do you think there's is it less than substantial?
Whilst I accept there may be less than substantial harm, I think the public benefit outweighs that because it allows a 16th century farmhouse to remain in operation in the 21st century. How many listed buildings can actually say they're doing the same job that they were doing in the 16th century? Probably a bit long-winded, sorry.
Sorry?
We also need to talk about conditions, do we not?
Yeah, can I just interject in the debate of what we're doing, is that not only is it improved, as you've said, in the 21st century, that's for the, do we need to define it that the heating is improved, the facilities for visiting public, because it's public benefit that we've also got to identify?
I think the more information you can put behind what the benefits you think are that outweigh the harm helps to explain that reason. And so if there are things members would like to add to that you're happy to carry forward in your proposal, then we should do so.
My understanding as a working farm is that if you don't have facilities to cope with people coming dressed in, dirty boots and the like, you are going to move that facility to another building. So because they've got the extension, because they've got what I think farmers often refer to as the dirty toilet, that they can operate still as a farmhouse and as a working farm. Without this extension, I would hazard to guess that working office would move to another building and it would cease to be that working area.
And just being part of the debate, can I just add that's public benefit, but also for the future of the building that will carry on when this family have moved on? Can we add that to it?
You can, it's up to the proposer.
We haven't had a seconder yet.
A viable working environment
yeah.
to carry on.
Councillor Muller, you might like to add something.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I totally concur with what Councillor and Mayor says on that, and I think moving forward it will be a benefit to future generations using that farmhouse, etc. I totally agree there is the public benefit. If you're in a farm environment, you're going to get people coming in dirty clothing. Do you want them walking through your house? So I think the public, you know, have got a toilet handy, like Councillor Mayor points out. So I do support his proposal.
Thank you for that. So do you want to read that out so that you can make sure that we've got everything?
Of course. So we are looking to recommend approval on the basis that the proposal would cause less than substantial harm and that there would be public benefits that outweigh that harm by virtue of the 16th century farmhouse being allowed to operate in modern standards, offers facilities to support the farm working, and the future viability of the farm would be supported as a result of the proposal. Does that cover?
Yep.
Yep. So conditions in that case.
Right, so conditions.
So you have some on page 48.
Yeah, we did have them suggested the last time.
Yeah, so obviously we've got the planning and the listed building.
So we need to do both of them separately.
We do. So I would normally suggest we start with the planning.
Right.
It tends to be a little bit more straightforward conditions-wise. We would have the standard time limit, which is not quite the one that's in front of you, that's the listed building one, but essentially it gives the applicant 3 years to do so. So I assume that's, members are happy with the standard time limit. Then we would do approved plans, which essentially does what it says on the tin. They would need to comply with the approved plans. The other one suggested there, condition 3, agreement of materials. That was, we would usually put that on both the planning and the listed building, just for completeness. In addition, a couple of things come to my mind, if I can make suggestions about things members might want to think about. The sort of the details of the proposed handrail, we haven't got a lot of details. Up to members if you're happy with that, or would you like a condition? The handrail.
Oh, the handrail.
It's shown on the elevation plan, but not over and above that. That's up for members if they would like that. The other thing would be implementation of the handrail. And finally, we've got the side elevation detail with the posts removed. I would suggest we might want just that little bit more detail on how that is finished. But that's up to yourselves. I haven't written them down, so if you want to confirm or discuss them.
So, Councillor Mayor, how do you think you want to get us to word that as... That's all right, you're doing fine.
I can go back to the beginning.
Yeah, go on. Let's. No, we're all right with. I think we're all right with the 3 years.
So it was. So we're all right with the 3 years, the approved plans, and the materials.
Yes.
So we agree. So the other suggestions is: would you want manufacturer's details of the handrail, or some more details of the handrail to be agreed by condition, or do you feel
can
you've
we
got
condition
sufficient?
it as a wooden handrail or something like that, less obtrusive?
Or we could say
like
we would normally do details to be agreed. So
details
that way,
to be agreed.
That's yep. So handrail details to be agreed. And then my suggestion is that we have a condition that requires the handrail to be implemented. It was something members particularly requested previously, and if we don't have a condition that specifically requires it, you don't have to have it to complete the development. It's one of those sort of foibles of planning. So we suggest, given it was members' wish last time to have it, that we have a condition that ensures that. Yeah. Does that make sense? Okay. And then finally, it was the elevation plan. Where the timber posts have been removed, the roof projection that's there, just to confirm that detail on that projection. So on page 4 of members' late papers, it's obviously just got the posts removed, and there's the roof detail that, to me, I think we just ought to seek some clarity on. But you know, this is up to yourselves if you're happy with that as a recommendation. Okay. So if I just quickly run through those again, then if that's okay. We're looking at a standard time limit, confirm the approved plans, that will seek details of the materials, we'll confirm that the handrail is to be agreed, we'll ensure the handrail is implemented, and we'll seek the clarity on the details of the side elevation. I mean, feel free to add some more, but they were the things that struck me.
So long as it's... Yes, Councillor?
So, councillors did raise concerns over the size of the windows. Is there anything we can put in there to ask them to
No, we can't re-amend the plans. It's what we've got.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
I think.
Yeah, I mean, we've suggested probably under the listed building option, possibly some more details in terms of what we often seek for listed buildings is the section details through the windows to make sure that the sculpture of it would be appropriate for a listed building. We can't change the size of the window, but we could make sure that the style of it matches the listed building. But that's specific to a listed building consent rather than planning permission. And I sort of was sticking to planning permission for those conditions, so we were clear on the proposal and the conditions for that, and then we'll move forward if that's okay, Chair.
Yeah, because
Yep.
we've got to... On that basis, all those in favour of the proposal now before us, please vote.
2, 5. No, hold on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Is that 5?
I counted 5, yes.
Yeah, and those against?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Right.
Chair's cast a vote.
Right. So that's the Chair's casting vote.
Advice privately, Madam
Yes.
Chairman.
Ian will just say a few words.
Very well. Madam Chairman, I think I'm very conscious that we didn't resolve to go into closed session. It was a little bit irregular, but I hope it was a fair and practical thing that we did in you asking for my advice. I will just say, for the sake of accountability and transparency, the Chairman wanted to be assured and reminded of the general principles of law relating to the exercise of a Chairman's casting vote. And the advice I've given is that she has, as always, complete discretion, i.e. it would be entirely proper for her to vote what would appear to be the same way as her earlier vote, but she has discretion to vote the other way if she feels that is expedient to do so. I'm sure Councillor Guthrie will, as reflects on that, and will now decide what to do.
Thank you very much for that. Well, on that reflection, I will be voting with the motion of approving the application on the building, is it called building, the planning building application? And so I will approve that. So it is a motion that is 6-5, is it? And so we now move on to the listed building consent, which we have to just have a brief debate and all the process again, please. Well, you need to tell the...
Thank you. I don't feel it's necessary to run through the presentation one more time. I can obviously put slides up as requested, so I'm happy that you've got all the information as it's there's no difference in the information provided for both applications. Thank you.
So if anybody wishes to speak regarding listed building permission, does anyone wish to speak at all? No? So we do need to have approval for listed building permissions, so I would need something from the floor on that, please. Can the officers just help what people are looking for, because they might be a bit nervous about what we're looking for?
So in terms of planning and listed building, we've said we could approve the planning consent. The issues of listed building consent relate to the works to the building predominantly. I think we're still talking about the harm issue and the consideration of harm to that in terms of more of both the works predominantly to a degree, also the impact of the building or the extension proposed. But that's essentially what we're looking at. The same applies in terms of the planning permission. If there are conditions or particular things you want clarified, we can add that and we can talk that through as part of any recommendation you might like to make.
So does anybody wish to speak on it, or is anybody prepared to propose the listed building permission? Councillor Muller, thank you very much. Now, do we need to put any conditions on that at all?
So again, we need to just confirm what we consider about harm and impact as before. If you want to say that you're happy with the same considerations that we put forward before, then that's fine, we can do that, and then we would move on to consideration of conditions, which again are on page 48. So we've got standard time limit, approved plans and materials, as we said before, for the listed building consent. Other suggestions, that things we would possibly normally put on listed building consents, is to request a sample panel of brickwork so we can identify the brick, the bond, mortar and the jointing. That's something we would commonly do if members were minded to. Details of the roof materials specifically. A section through the eaves and the verge of the extension again, so we can make sure the detail of that would reflect the historic building, which you don't perhaps get the detail in the elevations. And detailed elevation and sections of the proposed windows and door. Again, we would normally ask for that on most listed building applications. Rainwater goods being to match the existing. And the details of the roof projections we previously suggested. So you're free to add, alter or amend those as you would like.
Councillor Muller.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to go with the planning officer's recommendations on that. Thank you.
And so do I have a seconder somewhere for that? Yes, Councillor Gold.
Yes, I'd second on the basis described by the planning officer. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Does anyone else wish to speak on it at all? No? So all those in favour, please vote.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
And against?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
And it will go back down to the chairman's casting vote, which, having had the legal advice, I will vote with that motion to pass the application. Thank you very much to everyone, and I would like to thank the Heritage Officer who sat there very quietly listening to it all. And thank you for the input that you did put into both applications. Thank you very much indeed. We now close the meeting. Thank you.